You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome back to Inside Israel Today here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com. We haven't been here for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks ago I told you I was leaving to America on a 2.5-week speaking tour. Well, that's done now. I've had my turkey, I've had my leftover turkey, and now I'm back in Israel, back where I belong, and back here on the Land of Israel Network. I've missed my listeners. It has been a very interesting 2.5 weeks in Israel while I was away. It's never a good time to leave the country, especially when you cover Israeli politics, and this time is certainly no exception. I told the politicians before I left, please don't do anything rash while I'm away. Did they listen to my advice? Absolutely not. They certainly kept the people filling in for me very, very busy. And they were wrong. They should not have caused this much of a mess. They should have been able to keep all of their anger and frustration to themselves. Instead, after we had a very interesting outbreak of violence that was caused by Israel facilitating $15 million to be given to Hamas to ease the humanitarian situation in Gaza from Qatar, Hamas reacted by firing 460 rockets at Israelis in 24 hours. I assure your listeners, if you want to give me $15 million, I will treat you better. But perhaps give a smaller sum of money to the Land of Israel Network to keep the wonderful show hosts going here. But yeah, they wanted to flex their muscles and prove that they are not collaborators of Israel, so they put on a show. And there were politicians who wanted Israel to react in a more serious way, even though it was just this temporary show that the Hamas was putting on. Among them, Avigdor Lieberman, our defense minister at the time, who did not like it that Netanyahu leaked from the security cabinet that none of the ministers opposed the decision to not react in a serious kind of way. And that led to him quitting. Or did it? Maybe Lieberman just wanted to quit for a long time in order to differentiate himself from Netanyahu and had been under pressure from Naftali Bennett and the Bayit Yehudi party that kept on saying that Lieberman was a leftist and now he needs to prove that he's right-wing. And so he just used it as an excuse to leave. Not smart. He's lost his job as defense minister. He went from being very influential to being just a regular Knesset member. And then Naftali Bennett put on his own show in deciding that he would insist on being appointed defense minister. And that threat lasted 3 days. When he saw that Netanyahu was not backing down, Netanyahu was taking the defense ministry for himself and was not going to give it to him, and that the sky wasn't falling, and that he was under a lot of pressure to remain in the cabinet from his constituencies, he backed down, which Lieberman did not do. And in backing down, he was right. In threatening, he was wrong. And so now, where do we stand? We have 61 Knesset members who can pass non-controversial things, but they cannot pass controversial bills. And so that's why you had yesterday a couple controversial bills not end up getting a majority. And so where we stand right now is that the government can fall apart at any given moment. At least I'm back. At least they sort of did wait for me. There was a decision on Sunday of the ministers in Netanyahu's coalition, who are party heads, that they would ask the Supreme Court for an extension on the ultra-Orthodox conscription bill. The Supreme Court has given only until next week for a new bill to be passed. They made that ruling in August that the deadline would be in the first week of December. And here we are, approaching that first week of December, and they're not ready. and Netanyahu doesn't believe that he can pass it in whether he changes it or doesn't change it. The ultra-Orthodox wanted to change it a little bit. Two parties that voted for it that are in the opposition, Lieberman's party and Yesh Atid, they say if you change a single letter, we won't vote for it. So with Netanyahu right now in that bill, he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. And so if you can't do anything, what do? You ask for an extension. And not just any extension. People are talking about an extension for a month. No, he wants an extension for 6 months. If Netanyahu doesn't get that extension for 6 months, then the Supreme Court is basically going to be causing an election. They have to decide, are they going to be giving that extension or not, knowing full well that they will initiate an election. Because if they say that there's no extension, then next week, that's it. Bill doesn't pass, we have elections on the 26th of February, maybe the first week of March. Maybe the coalition parties will get together and say they want to do it a little bit later. But there had been a lot of talk about having elections in May, that's the time that Netanyahu wants to have it. He wants to have it after he goes to AIPAC in Washington, to the policy conference over there, after we have Yom Ha'atzmaut, wonderful celebrations and everything that make Netanyahu look really good, make kind of statesman-like speeches. We have a Eurovision Song Contest in May. Wouldn't it be wonderful for Netanyahu if the election could be at the end of May after all those things happen? But number one, May is also Ramadan this year, and 20% of the people in this country are Muslims. That's very complicated. And number two, it's the Supreme Court. They have to decide on this ultra-Orthodox bill. And number three, even without that, 61 MKs is pretty fragile. One Knesset member rebels. You can't really do anything. We got a Knesset member who had American citizenship before entering the Knesset, Rachel Azaria, who doesn't like what her government does on a lot of things, and doesn't have a lot of hope of returning to the next Knesset because she doesn't exactly get along with anyone. And she doesn't have a lot to lose. So she can cause problems. You have a culture minister in Miri Regev who isn't getting her way on some of the legislation she wanted to advance, and because of that, fires in a number of directions, causing even more problems. So we are on our way to elections, ladies and gentlemen, and they very well still might be that same date that I've been saying now for 3-4 months, February 26th. We shall see. I like our system of government in Israel, that we don't have elections set every 4 years, that we can initiate an election earlier on if the government isn't functioning well. You who listen in America, I know most of the listeners are in America, you don't have that advantage. Right now, about 49% of the country, maybe more, is very upset with the President of the United States. Before that, you had 8 years of a president who 49% of the country was really upset with. And that's going to keep on happening, that no matter who's in power, half the people are going to be really, really upset. In Israel, if half the people don't like what the government is doing, we'll get the support of another few percent of the people, and then you could bring the government down. You could initiate an election. You could get a different government. That's empowering for the people, ladies and gentlemen. That makes us more democratic. That makes us more healthy. That's a better way to live, I think. That every Knesset member has an influence more than the members of Congress do that way. And every average Israeli citizen can have a role, not just when they vote, not just every 4 years, but at any given point. They can protest, they can make statements to the media, which still has a role in the political system. Even on social media, they can have an impact in ensuring that our politicians will function better. This is a beautiful thing. And I know that a lot of Americans are jealous of Israelis for having a system that gives a little bit more flexibility. Now, of course, in the end, there is one person who's more powerful than all the other people. That's Netanyahu. And it's not only because he's prime minister, it's because of who he is. Netanyahu is a very smart politician. Netanyahu is obviously the most experienced politician in Israel by far. He was elected to the Knesset first in 1988. That was a long time ago. 30 years? Wow. He's a survivor. He knows how to manipulate the system. And he knows how to work the system to give him more power artificially. I mean, he's not only all-powerful because he happens currently to be prime minister, foreign minister, defense minister, health minister, and minister of immigrant absorption. He's powerful because of his personality. He's powerful because of his intelligence. And as long as he is there, the prime minister position will be a more powerful job than it's really meant to be. Every country has checks and balances between its executive, legislative, and judicial branches. I know in America right now there's tension between all the branches. And in Israel there's constant tension between the legislative and the judicial. Everyone in the legislative is upset in one way or another at the judicial for taking too much power away from them. But right now in Israel, the strongest branch by far is the executive because of who Netanyahu is. And whoever would succeed him, who would inevitably be less experienced and probably be not as good a politician as him, will have less power. That's the way it works. And then the Knesset will be more powerful, restoring a lot of the power to the people. Right now, Netanyahu has his own reasons for wanting the election to take place as late as possible. There are political reasons. He might want to try to stay in power until November. That's what he says. And complete a term, which would happen for the first time since between 1984 and 1988. It would also be a big accomplishment if he passes up David Ben-Gurion on the 31st of March by the most stringent count to become our longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history. That's great. And politically, he definitely wants to prove to Avigdor Lieberman that he was wrong to quit and that he's really the one who sets the agenda. So Netanyahu might very well succeed in accomplishing that goal. Netanyahu has made very clear he doesn't want to have elections immediately. And there are also security reasons, which are hard for people to understand. I suggested in my Frontlines column in Friday's newspaper that it was maybe the security reasons was Donald Trump's peace plan. Donald Trump is working on his peace plan and intense meetings with the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor and the Ambassador to Israel and the Middle East Envoy last week. There were reports in the Arab media afterward that in the meeting they decided not to advance the peace plan yet because Netanyahu doesn't want to advance the peace plan yet. I'm not sure that's true, and the ambassador of the United States to Israel, David Friedman, vigorously denied that the report was true. He didn't say what the truth was. He just said that they decided they were going to be revealing the plan when it makes the most sense and it would result in it succeeding, which weren't they supposed to meet last week to figure out when that was going to be? Well, if they did, they're certainly not telling anyone. So the plan could very well, though, for Netanyahu be something that would, in his eyes, improve Israel's security, because it is a plan that obviously would be more in favor of Israel than any other plan that there's been so far to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It would certainly allow Israel to hold on to more of Judea and Samaria, of the biblical heartland of the Jewish people that some call the West Bank. And I can understand why, from his perspective, it would improve Israel's security and therefore could be the security reason. Those spokesmen pretty much told me it's not. So if there is some big security reason, both Naftali Bennett and Avigdor Lieberman, who you'd think would know, say they have no idea what Netanyahu is talking about. And that leaves the legal reason. I would think, if I had criminal investigations pending against me, that I would want to have the election as soon as possible in order to prevent it, preempt it, have the election before the Attorney General rules on whether to indict the Prime Minister for bribery. But Netanyahu apparently is looking at it differently. First of all, he thinks he's innocent. And when you think you're innocent, then go with that. And if he's innocent, then he's not going to let what's basically would be a preliminary indictment pending a hearing decide when the election is going to be. Netanyahu might have other legal reasons that we're not aware of for wanting to have the election later on and not as soon as possible. What they are, who knows? So right now we're in this holding pattern where we're waiting for either the Supreme Court or Netanyahu, less likely one of his coalition partners, to bring the government down and initiate an election. That will be one of our most interesting elections in Israel's history. Now, the sad thing is, unlike other elections, when the election is over, it won't really be over. In the past, you have an election, okay, somebody gets asked by the president to form a government, and that person then forms a government. It takes 3 months to have an election, it takes 2 months to form a government, and then we're done. That's not what's going to happen this time. This time, you could very well have Netanyahu win an election by a landslide, have him have a difficult time forming a government, and then after that, even after governing for a little bit, then there'll be decisions by the Attorney General that can lead to different decisions made by his coalition partners. They might not stay long term if Netanyahu then gets a very serious indictment. You could very well have him be brought down shortly after the government is formed. You had a situation like that with the election of 1974 in Israel. Golda Meir got reelected, and then she got brought down soon after that because the findings of the committee that investigated the Yom Kippur War came out and made her look bad. The system in Israel allows that to happen, and that we could have another election after that, like shortly after the upcoming election, or you could have somebody else form a government. It could be someone in Likud, it could be someone not in Likud. Anything can happen. We've got some intense political times ahead of us here, and so I am not going to be leaving the country again for a while. Probably not until after the election. And stay tuned, meanwhile, to www.jpost.com and thelandofisraelnetwork.com to follow all the excitement and action as it happens in Israeli politics. Thank you very much. After the break, we're going to be talking about the U.S.-Israel relationship and what I learned about it on my speaking tour. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, broadcasting the truth and beauty of Israel to the world.
And we're back here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com, where, as I said in the first part of the show, I'm back from being in the United States for 2.5 weeks. What I didn't say in the first part of the show when I was dealing with Israeli politics is what a relief it is to be back in an environment that is less intense politically. Yes, you heard me. Israel is less intense politically. All that politics I talked about in the first half of the show, that's nothing compared to what's going on in the United States. People there are so much more political right now than they are in Israel. They're so much more intense. They are going through a tough time. America is more divided than I've ever seen it. I'm 41 years old. The people in the red states don't like the people in the blue states. And within those states, you have Jews. And most of the Jews are as blue as they come. American Jews vote for Democrats more than any other group in the United States, in part because they are the most secular people in the United States, and the more secular you are in the United States, the more likely you are to vote for the Democratic Party, the more religiously observant and believing you are, the more likely you are to vote for the Republican Party. So keep in mind, I was speaking except for one group. In Chicago, every group that I spoke to was overwhelmingly Jewish. And so even if I was in a purple state like Florida or in a red state, I knew that I was speaking mostly to people who oppose the policies of the President of the United States. Now, that can be a challenge because I'm coming from Israel, where, according to the latest Pew Research study, 69% of Israelis like the policies of the President of the United States, more than any country in the world other than the Philippines, where 78% of Filipinos like the policies of the President of the United States. That creates an inevitable clash between the American Jews who voted for him less than any other group in the United States and Israelis who like the President of the United States more than any country in the world except the Philippines. So how can that be overcome? Well, different people have given different ideas. For instance, in today's Haaretz newspaper, there is a headline called "Israel U.S. Jews Should Consider a Trial Separation to Save Their Marriage" by Chemi Shalev. This is a continuation of other articles that Chemi has written recently about how bad the gap is between Israelis and American Jews. And Chemi and I agree that there's a massive gap. Chemi and I completely disagree about how to handle that gap. He basically says in this article, it's time for American Jews and Israelis to spend some time apart. The Israelis can rely on their evangelical Christian allies in the United States instead of the liberal progressive American Jews and see how that goes for them. And the American progressive liberal Jews can go focus on themselves for a little bit. They have their own problems that have nothing to do with Israel. Absolutely, completely, and utterly wrong. No. When the situation is this bad that American Jews and Israelis are going in opposite direction, with Israelis only becoming more right-wing and American Jews only becoming more left-wing, Israelis becoming more religious, American Jews, well, the Orthodox are the fastest growing stream in America. Chabad is doing very successful outreach, but yes, American Jews in large are less religious than they were before. This creates more opportunity for dialogue. This requires us to talk more, not talk less, in order to understand each other, in order to learn where we're coming from. Pittsburgh was an opportunity for a turning point. What happened with Pittsburgh was absolutely fascinating because it showed the way Israelis don't understand American Jews and the way American Jews don't understand Israelis. We saw that because Naftali Bennett, our Minister of Diaspora Affairs, did the right thing by coming immediately after he heard about the Pittsburgh massacre on Saturday night. He flew to Pittsburgh. That was a good thing to do. And he also did the right thing by initially, every time he was asked, including by me, whether Donald Trump in any way indirectly caused this terrible human being to go murder people in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Naftali Bennett did the right thing by saying, I'm not answering that question. I don't live in America. It's none of my business. I'm not getting involved in your divisiveness. Correct answer. But after he gave that answer the first few times, then he started answering it. He started saying, Donald Trump isn't at fault. He's the most pro-Israel president ever. He is someone who has a lot of respect for the Jewish community. He has a daughter and son-in-law who are Orthodox Jews. He has Jewish grandchildren. Well, all those things are true, but the 72%, according to one poll of American Jews who believe that the rhetoric from Trump led to an atmosphere in which latent anti-Semitism felt more comfortable coming out, those feelings can't be ignored. Those feelings can't be made illegitimate by an official representative of the government of Israel. Naftali Bennett didn't realize he was doing anything wrong. He didn't intend to harm anyone. He didn't intend to be offensive. But he needs to understand that when people are mourning, they get offended easier. That's what happens. When people are sitting Shiva in that 7-day mourning period, they're allowed to talk politics. But when you come visit them, you're not supposed to answer them. And you're certainly not supposed to contradict them. And that is what Naftali Bennett did. And that's not what American Jews did when they came to Israel. When we had terrorist attacks in Israel, they came on solidarity missions, went to cafes that had blown up and places where buses had blown up, and they just hugged people. They could have said, if you change your policies, maybe that wouldn't be happening. But they didn't do that, and it's kind of what Naftali Bennett did. And that's what offended a lot of American Jews. And you know what? It showed that Naftali Bennett and Israelis in general have a difficult time understanding where American Jews are coming from. After all the positives that come from Donald Trump, we in Israel feel. We feel the embassy being moved. We saw it happen. We feel the Iran deal being broken. We saw that the Trump administration has made decisions to prevent Israel from being harmed in the United Nations. When it came to the Golan Heights, when it came to the UNRWA, the refugee agency of the Palestinians, in which there was a double standard and America pulled out from it. We saw America pass the Taylor Force Act to stop American funding going to fund Palestinian terror, including against American citizens. That was great, all these positive things, but we don't feel the negative. Anything that American Jews don't like about Donald Trump, about his policies and everything, and about that latent anti-Semitism that comes out from having the rhetoric that he has had, Israelis don't feel that. Israelis aren't affected by that in any way. And so that makes Israelis not understand American Jews more than ever. And the American Jews who said to Israelis that by saying that Donald Trump is a very positive president for Israel, that they're choosing Donald Trump over them, that shows that they don't get Israelis. No, it doesn't mean that. Israelis will get the best thing possible for them. They want every government around the world to have pro-Israel policies. There's nothing wrong with that. Even countries around the world. Look, the president of Chad came here, and that helps Israel. That a Muslim country is recognizing Israel. Okay? That doesn't mean that we like his policies that are internal about Chad. He murders people left and right, and journalists get jailed for saying anything critical of him. Maybe Netanyahu likes that particular policy. I don't know. But American Jews need to be able to separate that Israelis can like Donald Trump's policies on Israel and still like American Jews who don't like him. Israelis love American Jews even though they don't understand them. Donald Trump notwithstanding, the relationship between Israel and American Jews is not going to be healed as long as Donald Trump is the president of the United States. It's just not going to happen. He's such a divisive figure. He makes that gap widen between Israelis and American Jews. But he's not going to be president of the United States forever. He'll be president for another 2 to 6 years. And after that, there will be a healing no matter who takes over. And between now and then, there just has to be talking. There has to be dialogue. There has to be efforts by Israelis to understand American Jews better. There has to be efforts by American Jews to understand Israelis better. Don't disconnect and have a trial separation. If anything, the opposite. Have a trial reconnect. Have more and more dialogue. Have more and more efforts to bring people together, to learn why we love each other so much. The more and more that's done on that front, the better it will be for everyone. There's not going to be a complete healing while Donald Trump is there, but there will be more understanding. And that's so important. It's very possible that there can't be healing as long as Netanyahu is there. He's a divisive person too. He's a divisive leader too. And his relationship personally with American Jews is complicated. Netanyahu has over and over again, this time actually chosen what the ultra-Orthodox want over what left-wing, progressive, pluralist American Jews want. So he's actually making a choice, as opposed to Israelis who have not made a choice and don't pretend that we have. So it's very possible that Netanyahu himself is also a problem in that relationship. But Donald Trump being there and Netanyahu being there is not a reason to not talk. It's not a reason to disconnect. It's a challenge that has to be overcome. And the way we overcome challenges is by dealing with them. It's not by sweeping them out under the rug. It's not by running away from them that Haaretz wants us to do. And so one of the ways that Israelis and American Jews become closer is by having a radio show. Yeah, I realize I'm talking here. You're not talking back to me. I'm not listening to you. But I did meet American Jews who do listen to the Land of Israel Network when I was on a speaking tour, and it absolutely warmed my heart. For instance, when in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I said it right, Lancaster, not Lancaster, Pennsylvania, about an hour train ride away from Philadelphia, a very nice fellow named Neil Gussman came up to me before and after my talk and talked about how much he loves the Land of Israel Network. He heard about it from a friend of his who served with him in the American Army, who is now a monk, out of all things, in Germany. And the monk listens to the Land of Israel Network and is connected to Jeremy Gimpel. Interesting way to hear about it, but a word of mouth, and word of mouth from a monk is something that certainly helps. Pretty ironic, but Neil is a former sergeant in the 28th Expeditionary Combat Aviation Brigade, and probably even knows how to say those words, and former tank commander in the 68th Armor Regiment, and a journalist, former news writer at the Elizabethtown Chronicle, former airman in the U.S. Air Force. So Neil, I salute you for the service that you've done to America and for your love of Israel. And so yes, if you want to improve relations between Israel and American Jews, one of the things that you should do is encourage people to listen to the Land of Israel Network. And one of the reasons why is because the Land of Israel Network has a mission, and that's to spread love between Israel and American Jews. It's to make American Jews more aware of many things that they need to love about Israel. There's so much to love about Israel. There's so much to love about Israelis. And this network promotes it. It spreads it. It makes people aware. And so I think Haaretz is part of the problem with columns like that. And I think the Land of Israel Network is part of the solution. You are all part of the solution. And so I'll be back with another show next week. But between now and then, listen to Eve Harrow, and listen to Yishai Fleischer, and listen to Josh Haston, and listen to Arian Jeremy, Shlomo Katz, and listen to Mike Foyer, and enjoy. See you next week when we'll have another exciting edition of Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com.
Extinction, says Carl Sagan, is the rule. Survival is the exception. And I can tell you as a graduate of a geology department and a teller of the Jewish story that this is not a small fact. I'm Rav Mike Foyer, and this is the Jewish Story.
Join Rav Mike Foyer for the best Jewish history podcast, The Jewish Story, on the Land of Israel Network